School children are caught up in the fight for a separatist state in Cameroon's English-speaking region. It has led to thousands of deaths, at least 6,000, according to humanitarian reports, and around 600,000 people have been displaced from their homes. Regular lockdowns forcing children to stay away from school has led to a myriad of social problems. The conflict broke out into the open in 2016, as I've been hearing from Paul Njie, our correspondent in Cameroon. In very broad strokes, just remind us how we got to the point where we are now with this conflict going on.
So it began as a crisis in 2016 with lawyers and teachers from the English-speaking regions of the country denouncing what they said was the Anglophone marginalization in the Francophone-dominated country. 20% of Cameroonians are from the English-speaking regions, while the 80% majority make up the greater part of the country who are, of course, French-speaking. Then that turned out to be calls for a broader separation between both the English-speaking part and the French-speaking part. As of 2017, there was a resort into violence where the tensions escalated and the separatists began a campaign against schooling in these Anglophone regions, banning students from going to school, sometimes ordering ghost town operations, which has crippled economic activity.
Right, so it became violent quite quickly with gendarmerie acting and basically an open conflict going on. So how often do these lockdowns happen and how are they affecting learning?
So these lockdowns essentially happen when there is either a major national event or there's something like back to school like we are now. There is an order by the separatists saying to people, you stay home, we don't want to see you out there because education in these regions is banned. And it's a way for them to forestall government activity and for them to show that there is no semblance of normality as the government is trying to paint. They are occasional, as I would say, but then there is what they call the ghost town every Monday, which is frequent. That has been in place since 2017, where every Monday people are expected to stay home. But the lockdowns are more extended periods of stay-at-home orders. And when there is what they call their Independence Day, usually in October, that also should be coming up this October. But then broadly, every Monday, they are set to host ghost towns, and that has been recurrent since 2017. So whenever there are these lockdown calls, students are not expected to go to school. They stay at home because if they do go to school, they are susceptible to attacks from the separatists. They could be kidnapped or even killed, because in the past we've had cases of separatists storming schools and, taking a hold of children there, kidnapping some teachers and even students.
So has there been any effort made to continue education in spite of the dangers that it poses during the lockdowns and during the ghost towns?
In major cities where it's relatively safer, there are few schools, especially boarding schools, opening their doors. And then there are a few day schools also opening their doors. But the attendance is very dismal. It's not encouraging at all. And even during the inspection tours to these different schools, the administrative officials go there in armored vehicles, which tells you the heightened security disposition. And some students have left remote areas and have relocated to these relatively safer areas where they go to school.
And have pupils been largely safe coming out of the remote areas, going into the urban areas with government security protection to allow them to go to school?
It has not totally been effective because of the lingering fear. Some years ago, I think that was in 2020, there was an attack in a school in Kumba where students were killed. So that fear still lingers. Even though they are in relatively safer areas, you never can tell what could happen. And that's what civil society organizations have been saying, that the main goal should be to resolve the conflict once and for all so that these kids can go to school unperturbed about their security.
And how do the Ambazonians, the separatists, justify the campaign against children, for instance, at schools, kidnapping them or killing them in order to pursue their political objectives? How do they explain what they're doing?
Exactly. But what they are saying is that they do not want the Francophone-dominated government to indoctrinate their Anglophone children. And that's why they are clamping down on education in these regions. And broadly, there has seemingly been some favor in form of approval for some schools to operate, that's lay private schools, confessional schools, and community schools. But then they have been hardline reticent about letting government schools operate. And in the recent years, we've also seen some separatist hardliners also softening their stance on the issue of education in these regions. But there seems to be some sort of inconsistency among the leaders and the fighters on the ground.
Let's talk a little bit more about the social consequences of children not being able to go to school. Can you tell us, for instance, I see that UNICEF says that there's a rise in the number of teenage pregnancies, for instance.
There are also fears of increase in crime rate because of the fact that those who are not going to school, there are fears that they could turn to banditry and other petty crimes to survive. Teenage pregnancies, when they relocate to the Francophone regions, they do not have anything to do. Some of them, according to some local media reports in the past, returned to prostitution to make a living for themselves. So these are some of the social consequences.
Is there a political process underway to try and, stop this conflict from continuing?
It is costing lives, but civil society organizations say they do not see any political will from both the separatists or the government to resolve these crises or conflict as a matter of urgency. There have been international mediation efforts from Switzerland, Canada, and other partners, but seemingly these efforts have not yielded any fruits because of some perception of reticence among both parties. And so now government continues to say they pursue dialogue, they are open to discussing, but then on the ground there is no semblance of will from any of the parties, some analysts do say. So it's hard to tell when this conflict might even end. It will soon near its 10th year. That will be, I think, in 2026. People are wondering what would become of the future of children who are unable to, go to school like their peers in the other regions. Some had to, leaving these Anglophone regions, to relocate to the Francophone regions to continue their education. The language barrier, cultural differences have also been a major stumbling block to their integration in these areas. So people say that the only solution is for the conflict to come to an end. Rights groups have said that there have been arbitrary arrests, sometimes kidnaps and killings. Broadly, with operations like the lockdowns, they are confined to their homes. Sometimes, even if they don't have enough money to stock up on food, they just have to stay indoors for fear of being attacked. Taxi drivers themselves, especially recently, have been caught in the web of the separatists and government forces. The separatists have asked them to paint their taxis blue and white, which is symbolic of the colors of their virtual state of Ambazonia, which they call it. And while authorities are saying that these taxi drivers need to paint their taxis yellow as it is, they need to maintain it because these are the colors that the state recognizes. It puts them in a situation where people are now attacked because of what they do. Teachers themselves hardly feel safe going to work. Some teachers have been noted for absenteeism, and authorities are saying that they are going to, punish those who are absent. But then people are concerned about their safety. It is not really easy living in these regions where you don't, 1 minute you feel it's safe, the next minute it's back to violence. You don't know where to go. You don't know what the future holds.
That's Paul Njie, the BBC's correspondent in Cameroon.